I have with me here somebody that is massively important in my life and in a lot of people's lives. It's truly a pleasure to call this person my teacher, a mentor, a friend. She gives spiritual guidance. She's helped out so many people in the world, and she's too humble. She's too humble, and I'm just grateful to have her here. I have with me my Sifu, 5-time world champion, San Soo Kung Fu master, Kathy Long. So thank you for sitting down with me.
You're welcome.
And agreeing to do this. It means a lot to me. We had a class earlier today, and I figured out everything. I figured out I wasn't doing everything right. I need to work on some things, and
no, you just learned what you need to improve on and what you don't. That's okay.
so I prepared about 12 questions. Questions that I feel are meaningful, and I just want to start out by saying this, that there was once this, not divide, but the world of traditional martial arts and the world of sport fighting. One of the reasons, well, many reasons why I sought you out to learn from you is not only are you an amazing person, but you also had a Kung Fu background. And that's what I had a background in. So as soon as I said Kung Fu master, I got so excited I couldn't even sleep that night. Like, perfect, this is awesome, you know. And what was always concerning to me, at least it maybe in my own insecurity at that time, was I didn't know how to bridge the gap between a flurry of strikes, a different style of fighter, and traditional martial arts. And so that was one of the reasons why I came to see you, and now I've been exposed to this whole other world just from being around you. It's broadened my horizons in the martial arts. So with all that being said, some of the questions today are just geared towards some of the positives, some of the negatives, some of the differences between the traditional world and the internal world of martial arts and sport fighting.
Okay.
If you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
Wonderful.
As best I can be. We'll see.
Well, I mean, like, look, and here's the thing, you know, you have worked with just about everybody. You are a 5-time world champion and a Kung Fu master, and that's why that's why it's perfect, you know, in my mind from knowing you, because nobody, in my opinion, knows how to bridge that gap better than you. I mean, because you do know the world of Kung Fu. A lot of people, if you say something about Kung Fu, have you mastered? Do you know it? And that is like your heart. That was your foundation. So that's why it was so important, you know, for me to seek you out at that time. So my first question is how does spirituality play into the world of martial arts?
It's not so much that spirituality plays into the world of martial arts. Spirituality is an individual thing. Though we are all connected spiritually, all of us, we're connected. Some of the bonds are stronger than others, but those who choose a martial path can or cannot be connected to the spirituality. But it's more of an individual thing. Those who seek it out or feel the need for it or are more inclined toward that area, they'll do that. And then there are those who simply won't. They'll look at martial arts as a business, and they'll be more than happy to make $100,000 a year with their 5 schools and be really happy. But and there's no spiritual thought whatsoever.
Do you feel like spirituality can make you a better fighter?
Spirituality is, like I said again, a very individual thing, because everyone has their own perception of what spirituality is. And if you go into a fight angry and with hatred and you want to, destroy the person that you're going to be competing against, there's no spirituality there. It doesn't happen. So the most important thing is really to be as introspective as you can. Look into yourself, and if you're fighting for all the wrong reasons, and you ask yourself questions like, do you truly hate the person you're going to be competing against?
Yeah.
Then there's no reason. I mean, you can have that fight and you'll win that fight, but what's the benefit of it?
Sure.
When you go into a competition, a lot of people say, well, how can you be spiritual and still be a fighter? Well, it just means that, like for me, for example, when I died at 10 years old, I was, a whole spiritual world unlocked before me. And I knew that I was a warrior and had been a warrior many times, as well as a healer. And this time I chose to come back as both a warrior and a healer, especially a spiritual warrior. But the two can interlock and do well, and then there are plenty of people who just don't.
Sure.
It's up to the individual.
Sure.
There are times when if you have the right instructor, it can become a very spiritual experience in being involved in martial arts. But it comes with the right instructor, and you have to be ready, and it's a divine timing, as they say. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen, if it happens at all.
So a good instructor, or a master instructor, helps you dissolve some of that ego, helps you
Yes.
become more genuine, things like that.
Yes, I mean, you use the term authentic self, and it's shedding all the ego and seeing who you are really. Who is this person really? And you can say that if they shed the ego, then they become more of their authentic self, which is just the same as anyone else who has developed and shed much of their ego and become their authentic self. Because the soul is nothing but love and light and vibration, and that's it. And that's what you become more aware of who you are and what you really are.
Love that.
Yeah, it's true.
I love that. I love that. So, today when the question came up about using anger in martial arts, when you're more your natural self, if you have to fight, it's not from a place of anger. It's more of a place of expression. It's more of a place of...
It could be if you have to get into an altercation with somebody. I always look at it as self-preservation.
Yeah.
There's a reason I'm here on this planet, and there could also be a reason why somebody comes up and attacks you. It could be that particular experience is something the soul chose for you to experience and to learn from and grow from.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting way of looking at it.
It is. And then people say, oh, is that your way of justifying rape or this or that? And it's like, not necessarily. It's just the experience. And how you choose to look at it is entirely your choice.
Sure.
You can choose to look at it as something that's really horrible. You can choose to look at it as something that you need to grow from and learn from. And learn to forgive.
Do you believe in fate?
I don't know what fate is.
Neither do I. I just
have no
more or
idea.
less came across that through this line of questioning. I was more or less thinking, interesting. Because maybe the soul does choose things at times.
Of course it does. It chooses it long before you're born.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. I love that. So, there's a saying in Chinese Kung Fu. It's a poem that says, hand to hand, heart to heart, the fight won't begin until you start. And there's an old way of saying, it says, another one would say, I won't strike first, but I'd rather play the guest. And these are old warrior sayings.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't want to come across silly, with all your experience, but they say that for a lot of fighters, they say they would rather wait for somebody to strike first. Now, when you were fighting, or in your situations, were there ever times where you would be the aggressor, or do you find it, more or less tactically speaking, do you find it more advantageous to strike in return, in response to being attacked?
I guess that depended a lot on what was happening in that moment.
Gotcha.
Because I operated with I added pressure onto myself as I grew as a fighter. I chose to believe and understand that every fighter I came across was probably the most talented and skilled fighter I'd ever come across.
Sure.
So I really had to bring in my A game, and I had to fight as best I could, as I possibly could. And if it meant at that moment that I needed to be more aggressive and fight and hit first, then I would do that. If
Gotcha.
it meant that I had to be more elusive and make them miss and get them frustrated, then I would do that. It just, whatever was required at the moment, whatever felt right at the moment, because I was living in the moment each and every time I fought. I didn't look ahead to the future unless I purposely and tactfully pulled them into something that I wanted them to do so that I could hit them in a certain way. Another fight tactic. But in that respect, I didn't choose to be the most aggressive fighter. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I was more of an elusive fighter. It all depended on what was needed at that moment.
So, throughout this week or the last couple of days that we've been spending time together, you mentioned something about being able to adapt just super fast. Mm-hmm. And is that something that is something natural that just came from training, or is that something that was more innate that you were able to unlock? Just being able to understand and read somebody just super quickly.
That just came from years and years and years of experience. And also with the training in Kung Fu San Soo, we worked on that. We worked on being able to read people's intentions. And, because I had passed away when I was 10, and I became hyper aware of people's energies and thoughts, and I would feel their emotions and feel sometimes their physical pains. As an empath in that respect, it was easier. It made it easier for me to read people as they walk in the door, or if I'm walking down the sidewalk, or if I'm in a mall, or wherever I happen to be. If I felt that there was an ill intent somewhere, I picked up on it, and I would sometimes just seek that out to see who it is with this bad intent.
Would you really?
Sometimes, when I was younger and foolish.
No way, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was
wow.
Sorry, I keep hitting the mic. No, it's okay.
Wow.
Sometimes I did that. Sometimes I was smart enough to leave well enough alone. It just depends. I mean, there's no doubt that when there was a serial rapist, in my neighborhood, because it was in Bakersfield and it was always hot all the time, unless it was super cold. So it was either extremely hot or extremely cold, which sucked. This particular moment, it was extremely hot, and I would put on a tank top and shorts and dress, and I'd put on tennis shoes, and I'd wander around in the middle of the night looking for this serial rapist, hoping to find him.
No way.
Oh yeah, I went on the hunt, and I looked, and I looked, and I looked, and I never found him.
Wow.
There are times, I've done things that I wish I hadn't, but that's just part of human nature.
So at 10, with that experience, would you say that experience after you passed contributed, or is the reason why you're fearless? Or not fearless, but not afraid?
Well, I think I have a slight advantage in that I've physically died, so that I know what to expect when I do physically die again. And I know there's nothing to fear. There's everything to celebrate. Everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Truly.
Because, that's most of the times when people, or when one experiences fear or even a lot of symptoms of, with anxiety, which is something that I've suffered from in the past, is the fear of dying.
Yeah.
And so by going through that, it alleviates a lot of that for you.
For me it did. When I would work on Guru Dan on Wednesdays, and he would look at me and he'd say, "So tell me again, is it scary when you die? What's going to happen?" And I would explain to him basically what would happen when you not just physically die, but what happens with your spirit. And I tried to assure him, because he was very worried about it.
Yeah.
He still is, because he's
Yeah.
realizing his mortality at this point, at 85 years old. And he would ask me directly, what's it like? What's going to happen? What will happen to me? And he's very scared and very worried about it.
Sure.
So he would ask me, and I would assure him every single time that it's going to be just fine. Whether you die of natural causes or you die in a car accident, the physical part of dying is not what you need to worry about. In fact, there's nothing to worry about in dying, other than the attachments that people have to you and how people will mourn your loss,
Sure.
Their loss of you being gone. But that's really the only thing that's bad, if you want to look at it as bad.
Yeah.
But they're just passing on to the next life. I mean, the body will die, but the spirit never dies. Once it's created, it lives on for infinity, if I can speak correctly. But yes.
Well, it's actually quite beautiful. It's actually quite beautiful to hear something like that. Because that's on a lot of people's minds.
Sure it is, especially when you get older.
So thank you, for sharing those insights. Because truth is, it's always a lot of the time say, well, we don't really know what happens when you die. We don't know, but that's what everybody says. But for somebody who's been through it, you have an insight into what's happened. So the unknown for you is not very unknown in that respect. So a lot of the things with martial arts is, in any teacher I've ever learned from or studied from, studying the person for me was almost just as, if not more important than the martial art, and you're an amazing person. You are incredible, inside and out. So, but I do have a question about your fighting. Was your intellect ever present during your fights, or is it more your intent, your inner self, or your more willingness to win? Because a lot of the times it's said this, in times of self-preservation, the intellect goes away. The fight-or-flight system takes over, and what you've trained remains.
So, having said that, when you become a professional fighter and you have fight after fight after fight after fight, after a while, you realize that there's going to be a give and take. I'm going to get hit, they're going to get hit. And there's going to be that exchange, and you're accepting it and you're agreeing to it. Having said that, there then becomes, once you're comfortable, really comfortable in the ring and in that fighting arena, then you can definitely think and use your intellect to control their footwork, control whether or not they reach you, control everything you do with them. So, yeah, there's definitely intellect involved. At first, it's not so much dealing with your fight or flight, because I never had that issue. I always thrived under pressure. The more pressure there was, the better I did. Right? So that's why, in my mind, I treated every opponent as if they were the baddest motherfucker on the planet. And I damn well better fight, or I'm going to die, right? And it may sound funny as you say it now, but I really did treat everybody as the best fighter I could ever come across.
Yeah.
And I better bring out my A game, and if I don't, I'm screwed. So that was just a small amount of pressure that I put on myself, along with everything else that was going on. Because with any fighter, you have no idea who they are and what they're about. Yeah, you can watch tapes and you can study, but who knows how old these tapes are? Unless you're watching a fight that he had 2 months before, or she had 2 months before, you don't know if they've changed their fighting style. You don't know anything about them. You may think you do, but you don't. It's truly dealing with what's in the moment. Like I say, I've said it 1,000 times. Dealing with what's in the moment is most important. The absolute most important thing.
And you mentioned to me, this week that you didn't study too many of your opponents. You didn't really watch all their tapes.
No. My trainer did.
Yeah.
And he did his best to tell me what to do and how to do it. But He's not in the ring fighting.
You are.
I am, exactly.
So, because that was my always thing, because they always talk about fight IQ.
Yeah.
And for me, if you treat it like a life and death situations, a lot of the times, the intellect goes out of it. So it was always this conundrum type thing. Okay, well, you have a high fight IQ, but at the same time, you're treating it like a life and death situation. And so I wanted to just elaborate and talk about that, because it's one of those things.
But look at it this way. When I was bouncing in that bar for 2.5 years, and anything could have happened, where there are literally no rules, no referee, no judges sitting there counting how many strikes you've had, that's a true life or death situation, because anything could happen. You don't know what they know, and they don't know what you know.
Sure.
So
and there's weapons involved.
Right.
Things like that.
You just don't know. So in that respect, I look at it as the 2.5 years that I spent bouncing in that bar was literally the most life-changing experience, because I developed a keen sense of awareness of who they are, what they're doing, their intentions, and because being an empath, I can pick up on their intentions and their feelings. I also knew, I had a general idea of what was wrong with them and what was going on with them. Yeah, absolutely. You can call it a slight advantage, if you will, but
no way.
In that respect, I also knew that I had a lot of tools in my toolbox, and I had a lot of options, and I had worked through countless reality drills over and over and over. Okay, create this scenario, create that
With
scenario.
Kung Fu San Soo.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you were bouncing in that bar, was it, now I find it interesting, because I'm from a traditional background, 100%, in several traditions. Did you rely more on your Kung Fu training or your kickboxing training when you were in that bar, when it really came down to it?
You try to differentiate the two, and they're the same.
Yeah.
Because my Kung Fu is my Kung Fu.
That's right.
Whether I apply it to kickboxing, or I apply it to woodworking, or I apply it to leather crafting, my Kung Fu is my Kung Fu. And that's what I apply to everything I do. Everything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you.
Okay.
So, what is the biggest difference? And this is something that, I definitely want to address. What is the biggest difference between sport martial arts and traditional martial arts?
You're asking the wrong question, and here's why. Because sport martial arts is not a martial. Break down the word martial. Mars is the Greek god of war. Right?
Yes,
so it's
absolutely.
a war art. What they've done is they've taken a war art and made a sport out of it. So it's no longer a war art.
Sport.
It's a war sport. It's a
Gotcha.
sport where there's rules and
Gotcha.
regulations, and you have to abide by it. You have to come in a certain weight classes. You have to adhere to all kinds of rules. In martial arts, there are no rules. So you're talking about sport and martial arts. Yeah, there's some martial arts in these sports, in these contact sports, but it's not true martial arts. Martial arts is true martial arts, period.
And I bring it up because there, for a time, at this point, my feelings towards what other people think, honestly, is not a big deal. But there was a time where there was always arguments. Well, you got to learn this because, you're going to go to the ground, and real Kung Fu doesn't work because you're not doing this. And there was all these arguments that kept floating around, and it was dissuading people. I mean, I literally saw traditional martial arts schools empty out, when mixed martial arts and
Do you know why?
I would love to talk about that.
Because in the sport, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people watching this sport and supporting this sport, and athletes get paid. And then it's happened since the age of the gladiators, where they're throwing men in the ring with lions. And
Sure.
I'm serious. So there's this morbid fascination for violence that everybody has when they watch the sport aspect of martial arts. When they watch the MMA, and they watch the boxing, and they watch the kickboxing and Muay Thai, and even karate tournaments, they're hoping somebody's going to get their lips split open so they can see the blood. That's what they like. That's what they want to see. That's what they want.
Dominance.
No, they want to watch a gory, bloody match going on because that's entertaining and exciting. And it has been ever since the age of time. So when you have a true martial artist who's doing not a sport, who's not covered by media at all, then like, oh, well, okay, that's not so exciting as this. This is exciting to watch because everybody has that morbid fascination for violence. They like to watch it. It's like that whole pack mentality when one dog starts getting attacked by another dog and there's other dogs around, they'll all jump into the fray.
Interesting.
It's a pack mentality in that respect.
You know, because for me as a traditional martial artist, you know, everybody would be like, well, the conversation, do you go to the ground now? Do you do this? And it's like, yeah, I do some of that, but that's not my forte. And then it became, you know, random strangers. So this is useless. It's like, no, it's not, you know, and it used to really get to me. Now I look at it like...
You got to understand that they call it useless because this is what they watch on TV. Remember, media coverage. The more media coverage it gets, the more people are going to watch it. The more people who watch it want to do that. Or they understand that. And they don't understand the other martial arts that are not covered by social media or even great media.
Well, because that was the thing, right? I mean, you know, I've been to Hong Kong and I met with several Shaw brothers, movie stars. And at that period of time, Kung Fu was all the craze. I mean, and it dominated. Kung Fu movies dominated. And everybody from like late 60s, early 70s up until forever, it was always Kung Fu. But then because that was what was popular.
Right. Media coverage.
Gotcha.
See?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
If suddenly Hung Gar became all the craze because some actor became a master in Hung Gar and that's what he was doing and everyone's watching him do Hung Gar, then guess what? Everyone's going to go train at a Hung Gar school.
Right, that's right. That's right. So, with that being said, what are the benefits to traditional martial arts as we grow older? Because for me, like, I have some youth, but I'm not in my 20s. And for me, the martial arts that I've learned are going to last throughout the duration of my journey, however long that may be.
The most important thing to remember is the body is meant to move. It's not meant to sit still at all. It's meant to move. Yes, there are times when you need to rest, but as long as you're doing something that's going to keep you moving and you need muscle. You need weight-bearing exercises. You need resistance training.
Sure.
Even in your 80s and 90s, Guru Dan does it.
Yeah.
He still trains with people, and he gets a personal trainer who comes and works with him. He has a Kali instructor who comes and works with him something new. He's continuing to learn and continuing to move. Now, the good thing about COVID for Guru Dan, is that he was allowed a large period of time to rest.
Interesting.
Right, and now he doesn't have the nagging arthritis in his right hand. Now he can lift up his arm over his shoulder when he couldn't before. Now because he got time to rest.
And you taught at Guru Dan's school for several...
9 years.
9 years.
Well, eight and a half, we'll call it 9. It's okay.
That's amazing. So your and his relationship is just wonderful.
Yeah. And Paula.
Of course.
And a lot of the other instructors who are still there. The most important thing is, like I said, your body is meant to move, but without the proper rest, there has to be that balance. Right?
Yeah.
In everything that we do, there has to be that balance.
So with that, I mean, what do you say to martial artists, or even myself, because I'm currently doing it? Mm-hmm. So maybe this is just my way of getting advice. What do you say when you're training 6 days a week? I mean, like when you were training. You were training for a fight. I'm training because.
When I was training for a fight, I was often told that I was overtraining. However, at any given moment, if a phone call came and it was a promoter wanting me to fight on his card, in 3 weeks, and it was this X amount of money and it's going to be covered on, ESPN, it's like, yes, I'm ready. Oh, really? You are? Yes, I am.
So you were prepared at any moment.
That's right, because as your profession, if you make it your profession, that is your job. and you have to be ready 24/7. That's your job. That's how I took it.
And you'd fight anybody at that period of time.
Almost.
Yeah.
Almost anybody.
To be in fighting shape, to just at the drop of a dime, it's incredible.
It is, and I worked a lot, and I didn't get much rest. It eventually took its toll. However, in between all of the contact sports that I did, I had many years worth of rest.
Okay.
And I allowed my body to recover, and maybe I gained a little bit of weight. I didn't do any exercise, but it was okay because I knew that my body was recovering. And once I started back into another sport, I had no nagging injuries, no this, no that, no nothing. Because I allowed my body time to recover and heal.
Yeah.
So again, there has to be that balance. You know, when I was young, really young, and I was training 6 days a week and I had no breaks, there were often things that happened with me. I'd tear a muscle, or I would break a bone, or I would get knocked out, or I would, because, you know, I was pushing pushing all the time. But when you're young, you can do that. You can get away with it.
So you agree that overtraining is not good. It's not healthy.
It's not healthy, but, you know, it can be done as long as it's done the right way. I mean, I was doing twofers, workout in the morning, workout in the afternoon.
So your training days, you'd wake up at like 4 and go to something like 8.
I'd get up at 4 and go run, and then come back to the gym and do some bag work or sparring or whatever the case may be. Whatever was worked out, and then after I got off work in the afternoon, then I'd come to the school, teach a class, and then I would have my training sessions, whether it was sparring or bag work or mitt work or whatever. And it was always twice a day for years and years and years.
Strict diet, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
because I took my job, which was my profession, that's my job.
You're a professional fighter.
I took it seriously.
Yeah.
Because if anybody calls me and I can't answer the phone and say, "Oh, you want me in 3 weeks?" I'm so sorry, I'm not in shape.
I need to take somebody. Yeah.
You can't do that. A lot of fighters do.
Sure.
And it's up to their manager, quote unquote, to manage them and make sure that they're ready for fights. But I took it to the extreme. And a lot of people will say that. And, you know, I just believed that if it's your profession, you have to be ready 24/7. 365 days a year, you've got to be outweighed and ready to go.
That's incredible.
That's the way I looked at it.
I mean, that's why you were so amazing. You mean, amongst many other reasons.
The training never ended. Now, let's say I had a big fight. I was always allowed to take a full week off, 7 days off completely.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And eat whatever I wanted, and rest, and not run, and not train, and not do anything for one whole week.
What'd you do? Watch movies?
No, I taught classes, and I still worked, and
yeah.
I just didn't train.
And you thought that was helpful?
Oh, it was very helpful. But I only got a week off after each fight. Now, you know, there could be 3, 4, 5 months before I fought.
How many fights would you do in a year?
It just depended.
Depended.
Yeah, on who called and for what.
Yeah. At any time it rang, you were...
Yeah, and then you know, my trainer would also seek out promoters and find out when they're throwing their next card. And it became pretty popular in LA for a long while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, here's a question from my student Mandy. She's recently started up with me, and she's learning, and she knows all about you. Actually, one of the reasons why she's learning from me is because she heard that I spent some time with you, and I said, well, I was really hoping she'd be at the event today, but she has a question for you. She can't. She says, how do you convince women that a mostly male-dominated sport or practice is beneficial to women in this day and age?
You know, women are human beings, and human beings have muscle and bone and tissue just like everybody else. There is a known fact that men have more testosterone than women do, but the most important thing is, as a human being, you can develop your muscles and your timing and your speed and your coordination and everything else just like any other human being. Because that can be done. Human beings can compete against each other. But if you choose to look at yourself as a woman and you believe whatever your sets of beliefs are, but let's say you believe that, you know, women should not be involved in male-dominated sports, you know, and that's probably not the right thing to do. You could get hurt, you could get bones broken, you can break your damn bones playing tennis, for Christ's sake, but whatever.
Sure.
You know, I would say to them, as a human being who can develop muscle and speed and timing and power and coordination and everything else, you know, it's up to you in your mind and what you decide you can or cannot do. If you believe what society says, well, it's a male-dominated sport, you shouldn't be doing it. Well, then all right, don't do it. Go do something else.
Yeah.
You know, play ping pong. Who cares? In that respect.
Sure.
What do I say to them? I'm not going to try to convince them.
Sure.
Because there's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of people who will actually have the balls to get into the ring and do something about that.
At the period of time you were fighting,
Mm-hmm.
you were fighting other male world champions. I mean, people when, you know, they're big, they're strong, they're world champions, and you would spar with all of them. Were you ever scared during those moments, and did you feel that helped you in a lot of ways?
It helped me exponentially in that I learned to take a punch really well. I learned to hit very hard. I also learned, it's all my sparring partners who taught me how to fight. It wasn't ever my trainer. Ever. It was all my sparring partners who worked with me on a day-to-day basis, and I learned from them, not because they sat there and told me, here's what you need to do, but because I would watch what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would, you know, when I was fighting, I'd be like, oh, okay, I see what he does when the jab comes, here's how they respond to it. And I had to learn by trial and error. You know, I just got the crap beat out of me constantly, and then I figured things out.
And a lot of your style is the art of hitting without being hit.
No, that's not the focus of my style. It is an aspect of it.
Sure.
In the beginning, I didn't know that. I didn't learn how to do any of that. Sure. You know, it wasn't until much later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but in the beginning, what I had was a huge love for adrenaline, having the shit scared out of me, and knowing that, you know, getting in the ring is one of the best ways to get a huge adrenaline jump.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. But it was just something that I found really exciting to me and challenging at the same time, because I didn't know what I was doing, but, you know, when I was in the middle of Kung Fu San Soo training and I told you about being thrown on the ground and waking up,
Yes.
from that point on, I had no fear necessarily. I mean, there's always the fear of losing and disappointing your coach and, you know, not getting the decision, but that's not the same as having deep-seated fear.
Sure.
Right? Like if
Sure.
somebody were to sneak into my house, I wouldn't be afraid, because I'd turn the predator on and it's like, all right, you're coming into my house, coming into my territory. Okay, it's on.
Well, I don't think they better rue the day they try to do that with you.
You know, it's one of those situations where, you know, let's say I get into an altercation with somebody who's attacking me, and, you know, if they win, if they kill me, they will look in the mirror every day, and they will be reminded of me, because I will not go lightly.
Yeah.
I will maim and destroy whatever I touch.
Yeah. Well, and you've proven that.
You've proven that. They will remember me for the rest of their life. Yeah.
So something awoke within you during that sparring match.
It wasn't a sparring match. It was Kung Fu San Soo.
Kung Fu San Soo.
Yeah. I got slammed on the ground. And a lot of times it happens that way. It's interesting, because I was with a friend of mine in, where was I? I was in Fullerton at Eric Paulson's gym, and a man named Kurt Doyle, who's from Texas, Houston, Texas. And we're training, and I'm right in the middle of doing all my energy healing work. I was learning how to do that. And Patrick Price, the inventor of the particular system that he's working with, was there, and Kurt was there, and I didn't know Kurt all that well, but anyway, we all piled into the car to go have some lunch real quick, and I looked over at Kurt and I just slapped his leg real hard. And when I know, but when that happened, that sparked an experience that we had in another lifetime, and he and I both saw it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
So kind of like a deja vu almost.
No, it was a actual get to see what had happened at that time. You know,
wow.
He became aware of it and was seeing it at the same time I was seeing it when I slapped him on the leg. Yeah.
So it's mutual.
Very
symbiotic.
mutual. It was mutual. We both saw it.
Wow.
And it was also that kind of awakening when I got slammed to the ground. It was just suddenly I'm aware of all kinds of things, and I just woke up. But this whatever monster was inside me, and I hesitate to use the word monster, but it was just, I was so hungry to just rip through people. And I had zero fear. And anytime someone threw a punch at me, no matter how hard it was, I would slam them on the ground and, kick them and punch them and, palm them in the eyes and hit them in the windpipe. And I was going for it. Every single strike was to me a death shot. Every single one. And I was going for it. And they didn't know how to take it, and I didn't know how to control it at the time. It was just very interesting. But it was something similar to that.
But now you do know how to control it. You can turn it on and off almost.
It's not that I control it. It's just that we have an agreement.
Interesting.
If I need it, it's there. If I don't need it, it's still there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I have a question from my long-term Kung Fu brother, Ken. And he studied with most of my teachers. He studied Hancock's a lot, Screamer. He was with me in Chinatown. And he's older. He's in his 70s now. So I'll ask you some of his questions. He says, and I quote, Kathy Long has personal reasons for having done that intense training for many years to become top level. She's done the fighting thing, is a world champion, and with all that behind her, what does it mean now to be a martial artist for you?
It's going to be vital to the rest of my existence on this plane. It's super important for me to not just get back to fight shape, but to get back to being able to do whatever I decide I want to do. It's knowing that from this point on, as I start training and getting back into decent shape, no matter what happens, and I will be able to survive it because I'm continuing in the martial arts, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I'll be able to face things with much more ease and confidence because I'm training again. There's something very, very well known that when you're training actively, whether it's in a sport or martial arts or whatever the case may be, but you're moving your body, that creates endorphins, and
sure.
it helps you function in so many ways, and I haven't been able to do that. Now, given the fact that I competed in all these sports, and I did take years off, I was always able to get back into training when I wanted to, and I don't want that to ever end, ever. And as long as I continue moving, my body will cooperate. Am I a little more careful about how I train? Yes.
Sure.
Because I just don't want to overdo it. I know that I tend to be dehydrated too much all the time, so that has an effect on your kidneys and your liver, of course. But I'm trying to drink more water and be aware of that. But I think the only things that are right now that are holding me back, and today was a good test because I worked barefoot last night.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
And I worked barefoot today.
You did.
And my foot feels fine. So
that's awesome.
That was a good test.
That's
it was a
awesome.
good test to see how my foot would handle it and whether or not I could walk the next day, for example. So now that I know that that's good, more training is going to happen, and I guess the question was, as I get older.
What does it mean to you to be a martial artist? Is what he's saying.
Well, it's either be a martial artist and move or die.
Sure.
Not ready to die yet. I have too much to do.
So he went on to say a couple things. You've been a bodyguard, a balancer, and studied with the greatest luminaries in the martial arts, which is true. It seems that you have shifted into a more mature understanding of the fighting arts, focusing on healing and self-defense. It's well articulated. Unless one is to compete in the ring, what is the reason to deeply learn a martial art? Like, I think what he's saying is, if you're not getting paid for it, or it's not a professional thing, why does one, or why do you deeply study? And it's coming because I know my Kung Fu brother, and where he's coming from is, he studied in Chinatown with my teacher. He trained 6-7 days a week, and he sought out that path daily, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, deep study. And so I think he's asking you that same question.
A common misconception that people have is when they want to meditate is they have to sit still and devoid themselves of all noise and distractions and be able to meditate. Sure. It's not true. You can meditate while you're doing Kung Fu. It becomes a moving meditation. Anytime you're moving and doing something, you can slip right into that meditative state and be in there and still be doing Kung Fu or doing a form or whatever you want to do in that respect, but you're still in that meditative state.
Sure.
You've been there. You've done that, right? I'm sure at some point in your coming up into martial arts. Well, in that respect, that has become. I mean, running and doing Kung Fu used to be my meditation.
Interesting.
Right, and it's not that I would stop running and sit down and meditate. No, you can meditate while you're running. You can meditate while you're doing Kung Fu.
Do you think that your Kung Fu is, or how about this? I'll reframe the question. Do you feel like your Kung Fu is a way to reach your higher self?
You reach your higher self by deciding to reach to your higher self. Speaking out loud has energy. Everything you say goes out into literally the universe, and there is no way of stopping it. There's not a wall right there that would stop what I'm saying now. It's gonna carry, and the intent behind it will carry. Sure. On and on and on, forever, for infinity. It carries.
Sure.
So, yes, you can touch on spirituality through martial arts, but the most important thing is to if you want to focus on that, let that be your way of meditating.
Sure.
Because there's a technique that psychologists use, and I'm scrambling to remember the name of it, but when people are having a hard time talking about something that is really traumatic, that has been really traumatic for them, a technique that some psychologists use is a slight distraction, where you're sitting down, maybe you're sitting down next to each other and you're looking at a fire, and while you're looking at the fire, it can be very calming. And I wish I could remember the technique and what it's called, but what it does do is it helps your subconscious mind come up with the things that you need to talk about while your conscious monkey mind is focusing on the fire.
Sure.
Right?
Interesting.
Yes, and it allows you to relax, and it allows you to come into a meditative state literally without even thinking about it, because you're watching the fire. And you're watching how the fires are sparking, and and the colors, and they're changing, and you're mesmerized by that, and you're focused on that, and while you're focused on that, then you're able to describe what had happened to you when you were younger, or this traumatic experience.
Interesting.
And it's a technique that psychologists use all the time, but it's also a technique that is possible while you're doing martial arts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Kung Fu and traditional fighting arts have shifted gears compared to the old days. So what direction have you seen it take in modern times? The good things and the bad, and what have the arts gained or what have they lost?
Well, with MMA as a sport that is based in some martial arts, you know, that has been a huge controversy with people. Is MMA actually a martial art? No, of course not. It's a sport, but it involves several styles of martial arts. And, you know, from this point on, there will always be that, will a traditional martial arts be able to beat up an MMA fighter?
Well, and if you hit vital points, well, so can,
Right.
those type of
But
arguments.
you have to understand that an MMA fighter, if he goes out into the real world and he gets into an altercation, somebody like myself or you, who is used to hitting a vital target where they're not allowed to, it all depends. It all boils down to the individual and what they're capable of, what they're willing to do, and what they're not willing to do, whether consciously or subconsciously.
Interesting.
Right, because consciously and subconsciously, I have zero qualms about ripping somebody's face off and smashing them into the cement if it's needed. If I feel if I truly feel and I believe that is needed, that's what will happen.
So, and you've been in both. I mean, your experience is so massive. You've taught the police force. You've been a bodyguard. You've done, you've done just about everything. Self-defense classes, and you've worked with the best. You are the best, in my opinion. But with that being said, I pose the next question: is the energy different in a street fight than in a ring?
Absolutely. And the intent is different. In a street fight, there may be, two guys who got into an argument over who knows what. Or there could be the guy who's trying to pickpocket the wallet and actually got caught.
Gotcha.
Right? There could be, the guy's a dog attacked another person's cat or attacked a person. And then there's the fight that ensued between those two guys. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to fight out in public that would prompt two people to get into an altercation. And there's also the skill level. If you're a martial artist, you can hype up or you can tone down what's needed.
Yeah.
If you've had enough practice, right? If you've had enough real world experience, but a lot of them don't. A lot of martial artists will train and train and train and train and train, and they believe that what they're learning is something that's very valuable and highly effective until they find out it's not.
Yes, whether it's practical or not, to that regard.
Right, because what they're used to is a person standing in front of them when you're both ready and you're both wearing the right appropriate clothing and you both have the right mindset, and then they're going to throw the punch that you're expecting. Or even if they're throwing a punch you're not expecting, it's still something that is set and choreographed to a certain degree.
Sure. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the most important way to train in martial arts for the inevitability of or the possible concept of getting into an altercation with someone out in public is to train every freaking way you possibly can with the most different training partners as possible. Big, small, fat, skinny, big boned, small boned, doesn't matter. Short and wiry or long and thin. You got to be able to know how to handle everybody. That means you've got to have a crap load of tools in your toolbox.
And that only comes from training,
Experience.
practice.
Training it and training it and training it and training it and training it in the most realistic way possible.
Either through sparring or simulations.
No, because sparring involves you put on a pair of gloves
Sure.
and you just punch each other.
Sure. Interesting.
So I say that because When you want to train in the most realistic way possible, then you have to have people come at you and just swing wildly at you and not know what the hell they're doing, but they're swinging wild and their intent is to knock your block off.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the sad thing and the most important thing is you have to know how to stop that from hitting you, from getting hit.
And I think that that's where traditional martial arts can also learn a lot, because it can, you know, in some regards, right, where tradition is excellent.
There's nothing wrong with traditional martial arts, because in the old days, you know, when the monks were getting, you know, robbed, the monks had to learn how to fight.
Sure.
Right? So they fought in people who were just your everyday thieves. They didn't fight people who were accomplished martial artists.
Yeah.
Right? They were thieves. They were people who were stealing their money. And as they're going around, you know, mercifully getting money from other people, and then they get theirs stolen, you know, they have to learn how to fight in order to stop that from happening. But it wasn't about, okay, I need to fight the guy who is a well-rounded martial artist. Who knows MMA, and he knows wrestling, and he knows kickboxing, and he knows judo, and he knows...
Yeah.
That didn't exist back then.
Sure.
So with that being said, in martial arts needs to evolve and grow.
I agree.
Just like, I mean, yes, there is traditional martial arts, but that needs to evolve and grow.
I agree.
And become a new tradition.
I agree.
Yeah, I do too, but there are plenty of who don't.
You know, just because, you know, like, look, 300 years of techniques or whatever lineage you're from, you also need to look at what's out there and experience some of that and see some of that. And that was one of the reasons I saw you, and I'm like a kung fu expert and a fighter. That's who I need to see, you know, because you definitely, and you have in many ways, been able to help me out by saying, like, look, traditional martial arts has so many wonderful things, and you could get by just with that. But I wanted to say, okay, well, look, there's a new critter out there, and you got to learn how to use your techniques, and you got to know how to better yourself and your skill set as well. I feel like martial arts training would be beneficial for people who have suffered physical or emotional trauma.
Absolutely. And not for the desensitizing. It's just that any kind of physicality, any kind of training, which also leads to a moving meditation, is valuable. Whether they were playing tennis or playing water polo or whatever the case may be, they need to involve their body in moving, which also helps. Because as we all know, playing a sport or doing a martial art does help you feel better. Just going for a good long run helps you feel better.
Sure.
Moving. Your body is meant to move, and your mind goes with it.
I love that. I love that. So what does being a master of martial arts mean to you?
Not a damn thing.
Great answer.
It just means I've got a shitload more to learn.
So we were talking about this earlier. When working on movie sets and in your old fight films, there were always celebrities around. What was movie kung fu like?
Well, when I worked on the film Knights, spelled Knights with Chris Christopherson and Lance Hendrickson, I got to do San Soo for a whole month.
Awesome.
It was badass.
Awesome.
A whole bunch of people who knew nothing about San Soo, but they were martial artists as opposed to stunt guys. And we all had a blast just choreographing. Me and Richard Burton would choreograph a whole bunch of fight scenes and just have fun. It was just so much fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, lastly, this is my personal question. I feel what makes you so special is that your spirituality, your skill set, and also you are so in tune with who you are. And so how does one who aspires to be so connected to their spirituality, to their authentic self, and their skill set, which I see in you so deeply, how does one bridge the gap towards connecting their art, martial art, with their creativity?
I can't answer that for anyone else.
How did you do it?
I don't know. It's just something that comes with time and introspection. I don't know how to answer that for anybody else.
Sure.
Everyone else is different. There can be people who will learn it similarly the way I did, but you either get it or it takes a while and then you get it, or you don't get it. Like I said, can't speak for anybody else. All I know is that as I've aged and gotten older, and all the experiences that I've had have really honed and developed me to who I am. I know what I can do. I know myself, so I know what I can do and I know what I can't do.
Sure.
I have my doubts on some things only because I've been injured, and I also know that in the last few years I tend to pull muscles more, just because I'm not as hydrated as I could be. But long story short, it happens as it happens and when it happens, and it's different for every person. So, I just can't say, well, as soon as you do this and this and this, that's going to happen. It doesn't work that way.
Because the thing is, just to talk about it.
There are people, I'm going to tell you this right now, there are people who become very spiritually heightened and aware and very in tune spiritually just through severe abuse and trauma. You don't have to do martial arts in order to become a very spiritual person.
Because reflecting on it, there's always you kind of mentioned it in certain ways earlier, or you mentioned an aspect of it, is that when you learn a lot of martial arts, you're doing in the beginning and actually throughout a lot of it rehearsed movements. And then through that improvisational work, you learn a lot more of your creativity. So the first part is Mars, and the last part is art. So that art part is when, I'm just saying this, I don't know if it's right, but the way that I see it, the art part is when you personally connect, and you're able to not only improv, but you've now connected with your art form, with your movements, and you're able to create. You're able to be creative instead of just doing rehearsed movements over and over again.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And that just comes through
Experience.
practice.
It does, but you have to practice a lot of different things in order to be as creative as possible.
I love that. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
For sitting down and entertaining me. You've been a great friend and a teacher, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome. So, I remember one of the first times I met you, and you were so excited about your Hungar, and I think it was in that rock climbing gym in Palm Desert.
About 5 years ago now.
About 5, God, it's been that long? Yeah, so anyway, you were really intense, really intense. And I saw you as somebody who is not just an enthusiast, but somebody who took his martial arts incredibly seriously. So you were showing me moves in the air that were so fast, and I thought, okay, he's got a lot of speed, but does he have a control? Does he know how to hit to the targets of the body? Does he know how to set something up? Does he know how to make somebody reach high or look high and then hit them low? Does he know how to do all these things? And those are just odd questions that I went through my mind. And the more you moved, I thought, okay, he's got a crap load of experience, which is a good thing. And then, we went on, and then the gym moved over to where it is now in Yucca Valley, and it's Americana, and Travis ended up leaving it. And then I didn't see you for a while, and then you, out of the blue, I think, called me and asked me, or emailed me, or texted me, or one of those, and asked me if I'd be interested in coming and teaching. And at first, I didn't connect the two, the Jacob that I'd met in the rock climbing gym to the Jacob who had asked me to come and teach. And the more I listened to you, the more I realized that, more people need to see and understand what it's like to be as open and understand your weaknesses, to stop and look at themselves and go, okay, my left roundhouse kick really sucks and I got to work on it. Because they'll hide it with doing all kinds of other things to wow somebody else and never throw that left roundhouse kick. It's like, okay. And you have to watch somebody, and eventually their weaknesses will present themselves to you. If you watch long enough and you're careful and you're patient, you'll see it. But the nice thing is, if you already know that and you feel that you have a weakness in something, and I even hesitate to use it as a weakness, but it's a tool you haven't developed yet. And you're saying, okay, I want to develop this tool so that I can be more well-rounded in this aspect of training and fighting and competing. Even if I don't compete in that sport, because remember, martial arts is not the same as a sport. Remember that. But should you get into an altercation with somebody who is a phenomenal boxer, you might have a difficult time.
Absolutely.
Blocking a very fast jab that's going to come through, knock you in the face, and then be zipped right back before you can even block, which kind of sucks. But the good thing is, and the most humiliating thing, and I don't mean it humiliating in a bad way, but to be humble about it, is to say, I know I don't have this strength and I want to make it my strength. I have a hole in this repertoire. There's a hole I need to fill, and there are holes I need to fill. So the fact that you were willing to come and work with me helped me understand how more traditional martial arts operate and think in the way they function. Even though I came from Kung Fu San Soo is not that traditional to me, in that they're an eclectic mix. What I really truly enjoyed was your eagerness and your hunger to learn everything you can about this aspect of it, and to take everything. I mean, you've been one of the absolute best students I've ever come across. No, I'm dead serious, because you take what I give you and you work it and you work it and you work it and you work it. And most typical Americans, they'll work it 5 times and they'll go, can I do something else? Because I've done this already. Yeah, really? Discipline is very hard to come by. Self-discipline is something that you have in huge abundance, which is a good thing. It's one of the most important things about anybody who's going to train in martial arts, or even sport aspect of martial arts, sport fighting. So the fact that you've taken that and you've been able to impart that for other students just makes me incredibly proud to say that you're not only one of my best students, but you're also a phenomenal instructor, because you take what I said earlier, you take your Kung Fu and you apply that into what you're doing. And when I say he applies his Kung Fu, meaning he applies his self-discipline, he applies his knowledge, he applies what he knows about what I've taught him, and he's able to take that and say, okay, I'm going to show you. And not only does he do it correctly, but he does it with the ability to be able to correct somebody and make sure that they're doing it correctly, because that's a hard thing to do. It really is. And it's incredibly important, because if you let somebody practice it wrong and do it wrong and do it wrong and do it wrong over and over and over and over, guess what? In an altercation, they're going to do it wrong. And they may end up hurting themselves. And then they're going to go, well, Jacob, I got into an altercation and something happened and I went to throw this strike. And because Jacob let them do it wrong and wrong and wrong, well, guess what? Whose fault is it? Both of them. But that's not the case when it comes to you, because what I see you do is correct people in a way that I would correct them if I happened to be standing there. That's how well you absorb what I teach you.
I honestly, those are some of the nicest words, especially coming from martial arts, which is my greatest passion. And I just want to say thank you for being my teacher.
Hi. Thank you for being mine.
No, you're the greatest.
No, you don't understand.
You're the greatest.
I'm always learning.
Yeah.
And learning how to teach. Learning how to teach every individual who is very different, and they have their own individual idea of how things should be done. And if they're not open and willing to change and evolve and grow, it's very difficult to work with somebody. So in that respect, it's refreshing for me to work with somebody who is willing to take what they've learned and set it aside over here. Take the principle of what they learned and apply it to what they're learning. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm not used to people talking about me, but coming from my mentor, saying those words means everything.
Yeah, it means everything
So
to me
thank
to
you.
work with you.
And we'll shut this off before I get all teary-eyed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.